My boyfriend and his affair partner humiliated me at the promotion party I planned for him, making jokes about me in front of 40 guests. I stayed calm. Then I put their secret messages on the TV and let everyone watch their future fall apart. My name is Meredith Lane, and I was 36 years old when I learned how quickly a room full of people can make you feel invisible. The strange thing is that humiliation doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in gradually. It starts with a joke that isn't really a joke, a glance that lingers a little too long, a feeling in your stomach that you've been trying to explain away for weeks. Then, before you realize what's happening, you're standing in your own living room, listening to people laugh, while the person you love helps turn you into the punchline. That night was supposed to be a celebration. My boyfriend, Evan Hart, had just been promoted to senior project manager at his company. He had worked toward it for months, talking about upcoming interviews over dinner, checking his email every few minutes whenever a decision was expected, and pretending he wasn't nervous even though I knew he was. I wanted him to feel appreciated, so I threw him a party. Nothing extravagant, just something warm and personal. The kind of gathering where friends show up, people eat too much, and everyone leaves feeling closer than when they arrived. I spent the entire day getting ready. I ordered food from his favorite barbecue restaurant across town, bought 3 bottles of the Pinot Grigio he always insisted was worth the price, cleaned every room in the house, arranged flowers on the entry table, and kept telling myself that the effort would be worth it when I saw him happy. By 7 o'clock, the house was full. Coworkers, friends, neighbors, his sister Dana, my best friend Keith, people I knew well, and people I only recognized from company events. Among them was Vanessa Cole. Vanessa was 31, attractive in a polished, effortless way, and worked closely with Evan. Over the previous few months, her name had become impossible to avoid. At first, I barely noticed how often her name came up. Then I started hearing it everywhere: late meetings, project deadlines, team dinners, weekend events. Eventually, it became impossible to ignore. At first, I hadn't thought much of it. People spend time with coworkers. That's normal. But then the pattern changed. As time passed, the late nights became more frequent. The messages never seemed to stop, and Evan developed a habit of placing his phone face down whenever we were together. When I asked who was texting, he'd answer casually, but change the subject immediately afterward. The first time I mentioned that something felt off, he kissed my forehead and told me I was overthinking things. The second time, he sounded annoyed. The third time, he looked directly at me and said, "Vanessa has a boyfriend, Meredith. You're creating a problem that doesn't exist." I wanted to believe him. I really did. When you love someone, your first instinct isn't usually suspicion. It's trust. You search for explanations that allow you to keep believing the person standing in front of you. Looking back, I think part of me already knew something wasn't right. I just wasn't ready to face it. The party started well enough. People congratulated Evan on his promotion. Music played quietly in the background. Conversations drifted from work stories to vacation plans to sports. For a while, I convinced myself I had imagined everything. Then around 9 o'clock, I noticed Evan and Vanessa sitting together on the couch. They weren't simply sitting near each other because there was nowhere else to sit. They looked comfortable in a way that suggested they had forgotten everyone else was around. Vanessa leaned toward him whenever she spoke, and Evan laughed at everything she said as though they were sharing a private conversation in the middle of a crowded room. I saw other people notice it too. Nobody said anything. Most people never do. I was carrying a tray of pulled pork sliders from the kitchen when Vanessa suddenly raised her voice. You know what kills me? Several conversations paused. She smiled broadly and pointed her wineglass in my direction. Meredith still uses a BlackBerry. A few people laughed. I stopped walking, mostly because the joke didn't even make sense. I hadn't owned a BlackBerry in my life, and my iPhone was sitting right in my pocket. The joke wasn't funny, but what hurt wasn't the joke. It was Evan's reaction. He laughed before anyone else did. A genuine laugh. The kind that comes naturally when someone says something you actually find amusing. "Oh my God, it's true," he said. "She's convinced technology peaked 10 years ago." More laughter followed. I stood there holding the tray while something unpleasant tightened in my chest. Vanessa kept going, moving from jokes about my clothes to comments about my habits and stories Evan had apparently shared with her when I wasn't around. Each joke got another laugh. Each laugh felt worse than the one before. Then a man from Evan's office joined in. Is she really the type who asks permission before going out? Vanessa snapped her fingers. Exactly. Evan told me she once checked if he was okay with her going to a game night. People chuckled again. The reality was much less dramatic. I'd asked Evan one time if he minded me going out because his mother was visiting that week and I didn't want to leave him handling everything alone. It had been a single conversation, nothing more than a small courtesy. Somehow, by the time it reached Vanessa, it had become material for a joke. Evan didn't correct her. He sat there smiling while Vanessa leaned comfortably against him. The sight made my stomach drop. Keith noticed me standing there. Our eyes met briefly. His expression said exactly what mine probably did. Something isn't right. I finally walked over. Evan, can I talk to you for a minute? I walked over, determined to stay calm, even though every instinct was telling me something was terribly wrong. Instead of standing up, Evan rolled his eyes. Actually rolled his eyes. Vanessa smirked into her wine glass. Then Evan looked around at the room and said, "See, this is exactly what I mean." More laughter followed. Not everyone joined in, but enough did. Enough to make me feel as though I was standing alone in a room full of people. I set the tray down before my shaking hands dropped it. Then I walked outside onto the back deck. The night air felt cold against my face. I gripped the railing and stared into the darkness behind the house, trying to steady my breathing. What I felt wasn't just anger. The humiliation hurt far more than I wanted to admit, and underneath that hurt was the weight of a secret I had been carrying for weeks. For almost 3 weeks, I had been carrying a secret. 2 weeks before the party, while Evan was in the shower, his tablet lit up on the kitchen counter. The notification came from Vanessa. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But another message arrived. Then another. Curiosity became concern. Concern became dread. Within minutes, I was staring at a conversation that stretched back months. Within minutes, it became painfully obvious that what I was reading had nothing to do with friendship or work. They were discussing apartment listings, future plans, secret meetings, inside jokes about me. There were messages about how boring I was. Messages about how easily I believed whatever Evan told me. Messages about how much happier they would be together. By the time I finished reading, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the tablet. I photographed everything I could find, making sure I had copies of the messages, dates, and plans they had been discussing behind my back. Then I spent the next 2 weeks pretending I hadn't seen any of it. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately. Part of me wanted to leave. Part of me kept hoping there would be an explanation that somehow made everything less awful. Instead, I froze. Then came the party. And as I stood on that deck, listening to laughter drift through the open door, something finally became clear. Evan wasn't going to tell me the truth. Vanessa wasn't going to stop. And if I kept protecting them, nothing was ever going to change. I wiped my eyes and went back inside. The party carried on as if nothing had happened. Vanessa and Evan were exactly where I'd left them, laughing together and completely unaware that everything they had worked so hard to hide was about to become public. I walked past them without saying a word and headed toward my office. My laptop sat on the desk. The same laptop connected wirelessly to the large television in the living room. I opened the folder containing the screenshots. For a second, I hesitated, not because I doubted what I had seen, because I understood that once I did this, there would be no going back. Then I remembered the laughter, the jokes, the way Evan had looked at me as though I were the problem. My hesitation disappeared. When I returned to the living room, people were still talking. Most people were still talking, drinking, and enjoying the party without realizing what was coming next. I stood beside the television and raised my voice just enough to cut through the noise. Since we're all sharing stories tonight, I think I have something everyone should see. The conversations gradually faded. Evan looked over. At first, he seemed confused. Then he noticed the laptop in my hands. The smile on his face weakened slightly. "Meredith," he said carefully, "what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I clicked the first screenshot. The television lit up. "Vanessa, can't stop thinking about last night." "Evan, neither can I. You make me feel alive again." The room didn't react immediately. Most people needed a second to understand what they were reading. Then I watched realization spread from face to face. Evan rose from the couch so quickly that his drink splashed onto the rug. Vanessa looked as though all the color had drained from her body. And for the first time that evening, neither of them had anything to say. I looked at them both and offered a small smile. "Don't worry," I said. "That's only the beginning." The first screenshot was enough to change the atmosphere in the room. A few minutes earlier, people had been laughing, refilling drinks, and talking over one another. Now they were staring at the television, then at Evan, then back at the television again, as if their brains were struggling to reconcile the two versions of him. The confident man celebrating a promotion and the man sending those messages weren't supposed to be the same person. "Meredith." My name came out of Evan's mouth slowly, carefully, the way someone speaks when they're trying to stop a disaster before it gets worse. Unfortunately for him, the disaster wasn't beginning. It had been unfolding for months. Tonight was simply the first time everyone else could see it. I clicked the next screenshot. "Vanessa, I hate pretending nothing's happening when she's standing right there. Evan, not much longer. Just be patient. The words filled the screen. Nobody laughed this time. A few people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Someone near the dining table quietly muttered, "Oh, wow." I kept my eyes on the television. Not because I needed to read the messages. I'd already memorized them. I'd spent too many sleepless nights staring at those screenshots, wondering how two people could discuss a future together while one of them still came home every night pretending everything was normal. Evan took a step toward me. "Turn it off." His voice wasn't loud. If anything, it sounded desperate. That surprised me. For weeks, I had imagined how this confrontation would go. I imagined anger. I imagined denial. I imagined him accusing me of invading his privacy. I hadn't imagined fear. But fear was exactly what I saw now. What I saw wasn't fear of losing our relationship. It looked more like the panic of someone realizing he could no longer control how the story would be told. I clicked again. "Vanessa, did she ask where you were?" "Evan. Told her I was working late." "Vanessa. And she believed it?" "Evan. She always does." The reaction was immediate. A woman from accounting looked away. One of Evan's coworkers rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. Dana covered her mouth. Keith crossed his arms and stared at the screen without saying a word. I remember noticing all of those reactions because I wasn't looking at Evan anymore. I was looking at everyone who had laughed with him earlier. Everyone who had unknowingly participated in something they hadn't understood. That's the thing about public humiliation. Most people don't realize they're part of it until the truth comes out. Evan moved closer. "That's enough." I shook my head. "No, we're finally being honest." The next screenshot appeared. Then another. Then another. Messages about apartment listings. Messages about neighborhoods. Messages discussing furniture. Messages planning weekends together. Messages talking about what life would look like after he left me. The room grew heavier with every click. I wasn't rushing. I wanted people to have enough time to read, enough time to understand, enough time to see exactly what had been happening behind the scenes while I was still grocery shopping for two people and discussing vacation plans with a man who had already started building a future somewhere else. Vanessa stood up so abruptly that her wine nearly spilled. Those were private messages. There was a crack in her voice now. The confidence she'd been wearing all evening had vanished. I turned toward her. Of all the things Vanessa could have said, the fact that she chose to complain about privacy was almost unbelievable. After spending half the evening mocking me in front of 40 guests, she seemed far more concerned about protecting herself than acknowledging what she had done. "You've been talking about me all evening like I wasn't standing 10 feet away," I said. "You sat in my house, drank my wine, ate food I paid for, and treated my relationship like a joke. So forgive me if privacy isn't the thing I'm most concerned about right now." Vanessa opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The room stayed completely focused on her. A few minutes earlier, she had controlled the room. Now she looked like she wanted to disappear from it. Evan stepped in again. "Meredith, let's go somewhere private and talk." That sentence hurt more than I expected. Because even now, standing in front of undeniable proof, he was still trying to manage the situation. Still trying to move the conversation somewhere he could shape it. Still trying to turn a public truth back into a private discussion. I looked at him. "Private, like your relationship with Vanessa?" A few people looked down. Someone near the hallway let out a nervous laugh before immediately regretting it. Evan's expression tightened. The polished confidence he'd carried all evening was beginning to crack. I clicked again. This time the screenshot wasn't romantic. It was worse. "Vanessa, what do you even talk about with her anymore?" Evan, "Mostly work, errands, boring stuff." "Vanessa, sounds miserable." Evan, "Honestly, sometimes I feel single already." I remembered the exact night he'd sent that message. I remembered because I'd been sitting beside him on the couch. My head had been resting on his shoulder. We were halfway through a movie. I'd felt safe, loved, secure. Meanwhile, he had been texting another woman about how miserable he was with me. That memory hit harder than any of the others. The affair was painful. The lies were painful. But realizing that some of my happiest memories had existed alongside his deception created a completely different kind of hurt. It made me question everything. Across the room, Dana finally stood up. "Evan!" Her voice wasn't loud, but everyone heard it. He turned toward her. "What exactly did you think was going to happen?" There was no anger in her tone, only disappointment, the kind that hurts far more. Evan looked away. For the first time all night, he genuinely seemed unable to answer. Because there wasn't a good answer. There wasn't even a mediocre answer. There was only the truth. And the truth was currently displayed on a 65-inch screen for everyone to read. Vanessa grabbed her purse. "I'm leaving." The words came out quickly, almost breathlessly. She headed toward the front door. Nobody stopped her. Nobody needed to. The real damage had already been done. Halfway across the room, a woman from Evan's office suddenly spoke. "I thought you were seeing someone else." Vanessa froze. The room froze with her. The woman continued. You told me you were practically engaged. Vanessa stared at the floor. No response. No explanation. Just silence. And somehow that made everything worse, because it revealed something important. The lies hadn't been limited to me. Different people had apparently been given different stories, different versions of reality, different explanations designed to keep everyone from comparing notes. The strategy had worked for months. It wasn't working anymore. Vanessa left without another word. The front door closed behind her. Nobody followed. Nobody called after her. Nobody even attempted to stop her. The moment she disappeared, every eye in the room shifted toward Evan. For the first time all evening, he stood completely alone. The sight should have satisfied me. For weeks I'd imagined exposing them, imagined watching them squirm, imagined feeling vindicated. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Tired of the lies. Tired of the uncertainty. Tired of carrying evidence in my pocket while pretending everything was normal. Evan looked around the room, at the coworkers, at the friends, at his family, at me. Then he quietly said the words I had been expecting all along. I made a mistake. The sentence hung in the air. Calling it a mistake felt absurd. Affairs don't happen because of one bad decision. They happen because someone keeps choosing the lie over and over again. I stared at him. Then I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the understatement was almost unbelievable. A mistake? I repeated. He rubbed his face. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Keith finally spoke. You didn't mean to get caught. Several people looked down immediately. Not because Keith was wrong, because he wasn't. And everyone knew it. Evan's shoulders dropped slightly. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked like a man running out of answers. The room waited. Nobody seemed eager to leave anymore. People wanted to know what happened next. Honestly, so did I. Because after weeks of silence, secrets, and suspicion, we had finally reached the part where nobody could hide behind explanations anymore. The truth was sitting in plain sight, and there was still a lot more of it left to uncover. Nobody moved for several seconds after Keith spoke. His comment wasn't dramatic. He hadn't raised his voice. He simply said what everyone in the room was already thinking. Evan didn't argue. That surprised me more than anything else. Normally, he always had an explanation. He could talk his way through uncomfortable conversations, smooth over disagreements, and make almost any situation sound more reasonable than it really was. It was one of the things I'd admired about him when we first met. Tonight, that ability seemed to have abandoned him. Maybe because there wasn't a version of the story that sounded better than the truth. Maybe because he finally understood that 40 people had just watched months of lies unravel in less than 10 minutes. Then something unexpected happened. His mother stood up. She had spent most of the evening sitting quietly near the dining room, watching everything unfold without interrupting. I had always liked her. She wasn't the type to create drama, and she wasn't the type to rush to anyone's defense before hearing both sides. The fact that she was standing now immediately drew everyone's attention. Evan! Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room effortlessly. He looked at her. The disappointment on her face seemed to hit harder than any screenshot I'd shown. I raised you better than this. The words landed like a punch. His shoulders dropped. Mom! No. She shook her head slowly. I don't want excuses. Then she looked toward me. Just for a second. Long enough for me to see genuine sadness in her eyes. When she looked back at her son, her expression hardened again. This woman planned a celebration for you. She opened her home to your friends. She spent weeks making sure tonight would be special. The room remained completely silent. Nobody interrupted because nobody could. Everything she was saying was true. And while she was doing all of that, you were lying to her. Evan lowered his eyes. His mother took a slow breath. You should be ashamed of yourself. For the first time all evening, I saw something that looked like genuine shame cross his face. Not embarrassment. Not panic. Shame. Whether it came from being caught or from finally confronting what he'd done, I couldn't say. His mother picked up her purse. Then she turned toward me. I'm sorry, Meredith. Simple words, but they mattered. Because they were honest. And after weeks of dishonesty, honesty felt surprisingly powerful. Thank you, I said quietly. She nodded once and left. The atmosphere shifted again after that. One by one, people began gathering their coats. A few approached me before leaving. Some apologized for laughing earlier. Some hugged me. Some simply said they were sorry and didn't know what else to say. Honestly, I didn't expect them to. There isn't a perfect response when you realize you've accidentally witnessed the collapse of someone's relationship. Within half an hour, the house was almost empty. The music had long since stopped. Food sat untouched on serving trays. Half-finished drinks remained scattered across tables. The banner congratulating Evan on his promotion still hung above the fireplace, but now it looked absurd. Like a decoration left behind after the wrong event. Eventually, only a few people remained. Dana, Keith, Evan, and me. The house suddenly felt much larger than it had a few hours earlier. Evan finally approached. Can we talk? I looked around at the mess. We've been talking all night. Meredith, please. The confidence he'd carried all evening was gone. There was something else in its place. Fear. Real fear. Not fear that I'd discovered the affair. That part was already over. Fear that his life was about to change in ways he hadn't anticipated. For weeks, I'd been asking myself whether I was enough. Standing there, I realized I'd been asking the wrong question. The question wasn't whether I was enough. The question was whether he deserved everything I'd given him. And suddenly the answer seemed obvious. When did it start? I asked. He closed his eyes. The reaction came before the answer. That alone told me plenty. About 4 months ago. 4 months. The number settled heavily inside my chest. 4 months of dinners together. 4 months of vacations we discussed. 4 months of hearing him say he loved me. 4 months of knowing he was building something else behind my back. Dana shook her head. Keith muttered something under his breath. I stared at Evan. 4 months. I'm sorry. The apology sounded small compared to the damage. Not because he didn't mean it. Because there are some situations where words simply aren't enough. He stepped closer. I never wanted to hurt you. I looked at him. Really looked at him. Then I quietly replied, you didn't care enough to avoid hurting me. That was the difference. People don't maintain secret relationships for months by accident. They don't browse apartments with someone else by accident. They don't repeatedly choose deception by accident. Every decision had required another decision. Every lie had required another lie. Eventually, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. I picked up one of the unopened wine bottles from the kitchen counter. The same wine I'd bought to celebrate his promotion. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. You should pack a bag. His head snapped up. What? You heard me. Meredith. No. I held up my hand. He stopped talking. For months, he'd controlled every explanation, every conversation, every version of reality. That ended tonight. You can stay with your parents, a hotel, a friend. I don't care where you go. His expression shifted. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely shocked. You're kicking me out? The question almost made me laugh. I looked around at the house, at the decorations, at the ruined celebration, at the evidence still open on my laptop. Then I looked back at him. You stopped living here when you started planning a future with Vanessa. The words hit. I could see it, because he didn't argue. He just stared at me, as if he was finally realizing there wasn't going to be another chance to explain his way out of this. Dana left shortly afterward. Then Keith. Before he walked out the door, he squeezed my shoulder and quietly said, "Call me if you need anything." I nodded. "Thank you." A minute later, the front door closed behind him. For the first time all night, Evan and I were alone. The silence felt different now. The audience was gone. The performance was over. Only reality remained. Neither of us slept much. I spent part of the night cleaning because I couldn't sit still. Every room reminded me of what had happened. Empty glasses, crumpled napkins, decorations I'd carefully arranged earlier that day. Hours earlier, those things had represented celebration. Now they felt like evidence. Around 3 in the morning, I finally went upstairs. Evan stayed on the couch. I found myself replaying years of memories, from vacations and holidays to quiet evenings on the couch when I thought everything between us was real. Conversations about the future. I found myself wondering which memories had been real and which ones I'd misunderstood. Eventually, another thought replaced that question. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe some memories had been real. Maybe many of them had. Morning arrived far too quickly. When I came downstairs, Evan was already awake. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked like someone who hadn't slept at all. For a brief moment, I felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the messages, the apartment listings, the jokes, the laughter. The sympathy disappeared, not because I wanted revenge, because consequences and revenge aren't the same thing. Around 9 o'clock, he started packing. Watching him carry boxes through the hallway felt surreal. For 4 years, his belongings had occupied every corner of the house. Now they were disappearing one box at a time. Every box seemed to carry another piece of the life we'd built together, from his jackets and books to the little things that had quietly become part of my daily routine. By early afternoon, Dana returned to help him finish moving. I stayed inside while they loaded the SUV. There was nothing left to discuss, nothing left to negotiate. The decision had already been made. A little later, Keith showed up carrying 2 coffees. Emergency support delivery. Keith handed me a coffee and gave a small shrug. Honestly, Meredith, a month ago I thought maybe I was reading too much into it too. I just never expected it to be this bad. That was probably the most comforting thing he could have said. Not because he had all the answers, but because he sounded like a real person trying to make sense of the situation, just like I was. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, I smiled. A real smile. Not because things were okay. Because sometimes kindness arrives exactly when you need it. We stood in the kitchen talking quietly while Evan carried another box outside. Then he came back in. His eyes landed on Keith, then on me. Then he stopped. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. Finally, he took a breath. Meredith. I knew what was coming. Another apology. Another explanation. Another attempt to find words big enough to fix something that couldn't be fixed. I know this doesn't matter now, he said, but I never planned for things to end like this. I studied him for a moment. Then I answered honestly. None of this happened by accident, Evan. His shoulders sank. The affair wasn't one decision. It was a long series of choices, each one making it easier for him to continue lying until the truth finally caught up with him. He looked down and slowly nodded. For once, he didn't try to defend himself or explain anything away. I think we both knew there was nothing left to argue about. A little while later, the final box went into Dana's SUV. The driveway suddenly looked empty. Evan stood there for a long moment staring at the house. Then he looked at me. His eyes were red. I really did love you. The statement caught me off guard. Not because I believed every part of it, because I believed some of it. Life is rarely simple enough to divide people into heroes and villains. People can love someone and still betray them. People can care about someone and still break their trust. The tragedy is that love without honesty eventually stops looking like love, no matter how sincere the feelings once were. I looked at him. The man I'd spent 4 years building a future with. The man I thought I would grow old beside. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't looking at my future anymore. I was looking at my past. I know, I said quietly. His expression softened. A few seconds later, he nodded. Then he turned around, climbed into the passenger seat, and left. I stood in the driveway watching the SUV disappear at the end of the street. Oddly enough, I didn't cry. Not immediately. The tears came 3 days later while I was standing in a grocery store trying to decide between 2 brands of pasta. I suddenly realized I only needed to buy food for one person. That tiny realization broke something open. I sat in my car afterward and cried for almost 20 minutes. Not because I wanted him back. Because grief doesn't follow a schedule. It arrives when it wants to. Sometimes over something as simple as a box of pasta. The weeks that followed weren't easy, but they were far more peaceful than I expected. Over the following days, my phone rarely stopped buzzing. Friends checked in, family reached out, and even Evan's father called one evening to see how I was holding up. During our conversation, he said something I never forgot. I love my son, but loving someone doesn't mean defending every decision they make. That sentence stayed with me. Because accountability and love don't have to be opposites. By the end of the second week, the house felt different. Quieter, lighter, and free of the tension that had followed me around for months. There was no anxiety every time a phone buzzed. No wondering whether someone was telling the truth. No constant battle between instinct and trust. The hurt remained, but the confusion was gone. And losing confusion felt surprisingly close to freedom. One evening, I sat alone on the same deck where everything had started. The sunset painted the backyard gold. A soft breeze moved through the trees. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. My phone buzzed. A text from Keith appeared on the screen. How are you doing? I looked out across the yard before replying. Better. And for the first time since that night, the answer was completely true.